The legend of Lazy Point Beach. You know, it started as one of those perfect days you dream about. The sun was blazing. The sky was a crisp, endless blue. And the smell of the salty ocean air made you feel like you could conquer the world. Emily, my wife, and I decided to take our kids, Tommy and Luna, to Lazy Point Beach for a bit of family fun. We set up our spot near the dunes, laying out towels and unpacking the cooler. Tommy, being his usual energetic self, darted off to collect seashells. He loved those dunes, always saying they held hidden treasures. I watched him scamper off, thinking he'd be back in no time with a handful of shells. Minutes passed, then an hour. Emily and I exchanged worried glances. Tommy wasn't in sight. I called out, "Tommy, time to come back," but only the crashing waves answered. My heart started pounding. It was like the beach had swallowed him whole. I sprinted towards the dunes, Emily close behind me, and our daughter Luna clutching her mother's hand. As I searched, memories of combat flashed through my mind. I had seen enough disappearances in the fog of war, but this was my son. My knees felt weak, but I had to keep going. Emily was trying to stay strong, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Luna, poor Luna, kept saying, "It's my fault, Daddy." I asked him to find the biggest shell. I wanted to reassure her, but I couldn't find the words. My mind was racing with fear and guilt. The local police arrived, setting up a search perimeter. They were methodical, checking every nook and cranny. But as the sun began to set, an eerie feeling settled over the beach. The golden sands that were so inviting in the morning now seemed to mock our despair. A local old-timer approached me. His face was weathered, and his eyes were dark with age-old secrets. "They say kids who wander into those dunes don't come back," he muttered. "Elias Grimm takes them." "Elias who?" I snapped, frustration boiling over. "An old fisherman," he said. "A legend, but folks here know better. He's real, and he's dangerous." I dismissed him at first. It sounded like nonsense. But then we found the animal carcasses, mutilated and scattered near the dunes. It sent shivers down my spine. What kind of person does that? As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The beach, once a place of joy, now felt like a trap. We kept searching, but with each passing minute, hope slipped further away. And then, in the darkness, I thought I saw something move in the dunes. Something, or someone, was lurking out there. And just like that, our idyllic day at the beach turned into a living nightmare. After Tommy's disappearance, time seemed to crawl. The police were combing every inch of the beach, and I was left standing there, feeling utterly helpless. The day had taken on a surreal quality, like we were trapped in some kind of twisted dream. As the sun dipped lower, the beach grew quiet. Too quiet. The usual sounds of children playing and seagulls squawking had vanished. It felt like the entire beach was holding its breath. I noticed the wind picking up, carrying a strange, musty smell that I hadn't noticed before. It reminded me of damp, rotting wood. Emily was holding Luna tightly, whispering soothing words to her, but I could see the fear in her eyes. It was the same fear I felt deep in my gut. Something was very wrong here. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every rustle in the bushes and every shadow cast by the setting sun seemed menacing. We decided to search the dunes again. As we walked, I noticed the sand felt colder, almost unnaturally so. There were strange markings in the sand, like claw marks or scratches. It was probably just driftwood or crabs, but at that moment everything seemed ominous. We passed an old, weathered sign partially buried in the sand. It looked ancient, with faded lettering warning about strong currents. It struck me as odd that I hadn't seen it earlier. The sign seemed to belong to another time, a relic of a forgotten past. Then there was the lighthouse. Its light had always been a comforting presence, but tonight it flickered erratically. It cast long, distorted shadows across the beach, making the dunes look like hunched, waiting figures. The old fisherman's words about Elias Grimm kept replaying in my head. I didn't believe in ghosts, but this place felt haunted. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply. We were shivering, not just from the cold, but from an unspoken dread. The air was thick with tension. Emily suggested we head back to the main search area, but I couldn't bring myself to leave the dunes. I had this gut feeling that Tommy was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. We found another clue, something small but chilling. A piece of Tommy's favorite blue shirt snagged on a jagged rock. It was torn and dirty, but it gave me a glimmer of hope. He had to be close. But close to what? The shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. I thought I saw a figure in the distance, but when I blinked, it was gone. The beach had transformed into a labyrinth of fear and confusion. Every instinct in me screamed that we were in danger, but I couldn't abandon my son. The old-timer's warning echoed in my mind, mixing with the howling wind. Elias Grimm takes them, he'd said. The legend felt all too real now. I tried to focus on the surrounding sounds, but all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. It was well past midnight when I finally decided to take matters into my own hands. The search parties were thinning out, and the beach was cloaked in darkness. Emily and Luna had reluctantly gone back to the car, exhausted and emotionally drained. I couldn't blame them, but I couldn't rest. Not with Tommy still out there. I ventured deeper into the dunes, my flashlight barely piercing the thick darkness. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and memories of war, intermingling with the terror of losing my son. Each step was heavy with fear, but I pushed on, driven by a desperate hope. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise, a whimper. My heart leaped. "Tommy!" I called out, my voice cracking. The whimpering grew louder and more distinct. I followed the sound, stumbling over the uneven ground, until I reached a hidden opening in the dunes. There, in a small makeshift shelter, I saw him. Tommy was huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Standing between us was a gaunt, wild-eyed man, Elias Grimm. He looked like he'd been living off the land for years, his clothes tattered and his hair matted. His eyes, though, were sharp and filled with a twisted kind of intelligence. "You shouldn't have come here," he growled, his voice rough and menacing. I knew I had to act fast. "Tommy, come to me," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. But Grimm moved closer to Tommy, a sinister smile spreading across his face. "Leave him," Grimm hissed. "He's mine now." Anger surged through me, but I knew I couldn't let it cloud my judgment. "He's my son," I said, stepping forward, "and I'm taking him home." The next few moments were a blur. Grimm lunged at me, and we grappled in the tight space. He was stronger than he looked. Years of living in the wild gave him feral strength. But I had my own demons and my own training to fall back on. We fought fiercely, the flashlight rolling away and casting wild shadows on the walls. My mind flashed to Emily and Luna waiting in the car, counting on me to bring Tommy back. I couldn't fail them. With a final burst of strength, I overpowered Grimm, pinning him to the ground. "Tommy, run!" I shouted. My son scrambled out of the shelter and I followed, leaving Grimm behind. As we emerged from the dunes, I saw the lights of the police cars and heard voices calling our names. Relief flooded me as we were reunited with Emily and Luna. The police swarmed the area, capturing Grimm and ending his reign of terror. In the days that followed, we began to heal. Tommy was traumatized but safe, and our family's bond grew stronger through the ordeal. The beach, however, would never be the same for us. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Luna looked up at me with wide eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "I saw Elias Grimm in the dunes before Tommy disappeared. He told me a secret." A chill ran down my spine. What secret, Luna? He said he's not the only one. There are others, watching, waiting. The words hung in the air, heavy with foreboding. Lazy Point Beach had given us back our son, but it left us with a new fear, a new understanding that some legends are all too real. Echoes of the tide. We laughed under the Huntington Beach sun, basking in the warmth of a perfect summer day, unaware of the horror that would soon unravel. Emily, my best friend since childhood, had this infectious laugh that could make you forget the world. But today, something felt off. She had shivered suddenly, despite the heat, and brushed it off with a nervous smile. I should have known then. See, Emily's been through hell. Years ago, her little brother just vanished, poof, into thin air. 1 minute, he was there. The next, he was gone. No clues, no closure. It's haunted her ever since. We come to the beach to escape those shadows, thinking the ocean's waves could wash away the pain. But I guess some wounds are too deep. We were splashing around, the scent of salt water and sunscreen in the air, when Emily screamed. I turned to see her clutching her leg, tears streaming down her face. "A jellyfish," she gasped. I rushed over, thinking it was just a sting. But this was different. Within minutes, Emily started to panic, her eyes wide with fear. "Do you see them?" she whispered, pointing towards the waves. I saw nothing but the usual beachgoers and seagulls. "It's simply the sting," I reassured her, but my gut churned. Then she said it, her voice trembling. "It's happening again." Her gaze locked on something, or someone, I couldn't see. She described ghostly children, their faces twisted in torment. Among them her missing brother, his eyes filled with sorrow. I tried to shake her out of it, but her terror was real and palpable. "Jake," she said, gripping my arm, "we need to leave. Now." Her urgency was contagious. We packed up and left, but the beach didn't feel right. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows over the sand, turning our haven into something sinister. Emily's hallucinations didn't stop. They got worse. Each vision was more vivid and terrifying. She saw the children everywhere, at the shoreline, in the waves, even in the parking lot. As we hurried away, "They're calling me," she said, her voice breaking. "They want me to join them." I didn't know what to do. I'd never seen her like this, so scared, so lost. We decided to dig deeper, hoping to find answers. That's when we stumbled upon the legend, a recluse who supposedly used jellyfish venom to commune with the dead. It sounded like a bad horror movie plot, but Emily's visions were too real to ignore. We talked to a local lifeguard, hoping for some rational explanation. When we mentioned the recluse and the jellyfish, his face turned as pale as a ghost. "You need to leave," he said, his voice shaking. "Before it's too late." I should have listened to him. But by then, it was already too late. The drive home was eerily quiet. Emily sat beside me, her eyes darting nervously as if expecting something or someone to appear in the rearview mirror. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a bruised shade of purple. A thick fog rolled in off the ocean, blanketing the road and swallowing the world whole. It felt like we were driving through a ghost story. "Jake, do you hear that?" Emily's voice was a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the engine. "Hear what?" I strained my ears, but only caught the rhythmic whoosh of the waves and the distant cries of seagulls. She shook her head, gripping her seatbelt tighter. "Never mind." The fog seemed to follow us, pressing against the windows like a living thing. I could feel Emily's fear, a palpable weight in the car. My nerves were fraying. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept drifting back to the lifeguard's warning. What did he mean by too late? At home, things didn't get better. Emily's hallucinations became more frequent and vivid. She claimed to see wet footprints leading from our front door to her bedroom. I checked every time, but there was nothing there. Yet, the carpet always felt damp. One night, as I lay in bed trying to convince myself it was all in our heads, I heard it, a soft rhythmic tapping. I held my breath, listening. Tap, dot, tot. Tap, dit or knee. Tap, dot. It was coming from the window. I turned, expecting to see tree branches or rain. Instead, there were tiny handprints on the glass, slowly fading away. Emily's voice broke the silence. "They're here, Jake. They followed us." During the day, I tried to keep things normal. We went for walks, watched movies, or did anything else to distract us. But the shadows lingered. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me, turning to see a child staring blankly from behind the cereal boxes. His eyes were lifeless, like he'd seen too much. When I looked again, he was gone. Emily found old newspapers online with stories about missing children in the area. Each case had eerie similarities to her brother's disappearance. Kids are disappearing near the beach, no traces left behind. One article mentioned the recluse, a local legend that even the police wouldn't officially acknowledge. We decided to confront the source. Armed with a vague address and a lot of anxiety, we set off to find the recluse. The house was a dilapidated shack near the cliffs, almost swallowed by overgrown weeds and wildflowers. The door creaked open before we even knocked. An old woman stood there, her eyes a startling shade of blue, like the ocean on a clear day. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice as calm as the tide. "You seek answers, but be warned, some truths are better left buried." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Emily's grip tightened on my hand. "We need to know," she insisted. The woman nodded, stepping aside to let us in. The air inside was thick with the smell of sea salt and something else, something metallic. The walls were covered in old photographs of children, their eyes hauntingly vacant. Emily's brother was there. His picture had yellowed with age. "The jellyfish sting," the woman began. "It opens a doorway, a connection to the lost souls trapped between worlds. They're drawn to those who share their pain." I felt the room spinning. Emily's hallucinations, the wet footprints, the handprints, they weren't just in her mind. They were real manifestations of those lost children, reaching out through Emily. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice cracking. The woman looked at us with pity. Her expression was sorrowful. "You must sever the connection," she said, "before they take her completely." Standing in that shack, surrounded by ghostly photos, I felt like the world was closing in. Emily's grip on my hand was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The old woman's words echoed in my mind. "Sever the connection." "How?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Emily looked at me, her eyes full of trust and fear. We'd been through so much together, and now our bond felt like the only thing that could save us. The woman handed us a small vial filled with a murky liquid. "This will close the doorway," she said. "But it must be taken where it all began, at the beach during the night." We left the shack with a plan, but doubts gnawed at me. What if this didn't work? What if I lost Emily to those ghostly children forever? That night, we returned to Huntington Beach. The fog was thicker than ever, and the moon cast an eerie glow on the water. Emily clutched the vial, her hand shaking. "We have to do this together," she whispered. I nodded, trying to appear braver than I felt. As we waded into the water, the temperature dropped, and the ocean felt like ice against our skin. The waves lapped at our legs, carrying whispers of lost souls. Emily's hallucinations were back, stronger than ever. Ghostly children surrounded us, their eyes pleading. "Now," I urged, my voice cracking. Emily opened the vial and poured its contents into the sea. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to churn violently. Suddenly, a phantom hand reached out and grabbed Emily's ankle. She screamed, and I lunged to pull her back, but the force was too strong. "Jake, don't let go," she cried. I fought with everything I had, but the spectral hands were relentless. Just when I thought I'd lose her, a brilliant light erupted from the water, blinding us. The ghostly children let out a collective wail and vanished. Emily collapsed into my arms, sobbing. We stumbled back to the shore, collapsing on the sand, our hearts racing. It's over, I whispered, more to convince myself than her. In the days that followed, things seemed to return to normal. Emily stopped seeing the visions, and the strange occurrences ceased. The beach remained closed, but life slowly moved on. One evening, as we were packing up to move away from this haunted place, Emily found an old photo tucked into her journal. It was a picture of her brother, smiling at the beach. But behind him, barely visible, were the ghostly children, their eyes fixed on the camera. My blood ran cold. Emily, where did this come from? She looked at me, confusion turning to fear. I don't know, Jake. I've never seen this before. That night I had a dream. I was back at the beach, standing in the waves. The ghostly children surrounded me, but this time, they weren't alone. Emily was with them, her eyes vacant and haunting. She reached out to me, whispering, "Come join us." I woke up in a cold sweat, realizing the truth. The connection wasn't severed, it had merely shifted. Now it was me they wanted. The story wasn't over, it had only just begun. As we drove away from Huntington Beach, I glanced in the rear-view mirror. For a split second, I saw Emily's brother standing at the shoreline watching us leave. And then he was gone. The drowned passed. The boy's lifeless body was only the beginning of a nightmare that would drag me and my sister into the depths of horror. I've always been haunted by that day, years ago, when I failed to save a drowning child. As a seasoned lifeguard, I was supposed to be the guardian of the shore, but that day, I failed. My sister, Megan, has always been the strong one. A journalist with a nose for stories, she never let things go easily. So when another young boy's body washed up on the shore, she was immediately suspicious. "Jason, there's something more to this," she said, her eyes sharp with determination. I wanted to brush it off, but deep down I knew she was right. We grew up in this beach town, where the smell of salt water and the gritty sand were as familiar as our own hands. But beneath its sun-kissed surface lay a dark history, marked by mysterious drownings that had plagued our community for decades. The locals were superstitious, always whispering about old legends and curses. As Megan and I started digging, we heard whispers of a secretive group. They believed that the sea demanded sacrifices to prevent greater disasters. It sounded like a ghost story, the kind of thing kids dare each other to talk about at night. But the more Megan uncovered, the more sinister it all became. This group wasn't just a relic of the past. They were real and manipulating children into becoming part of their deadly rituals. The beach became eerie as the sun set. The relentless crash of waves seemed like a warning. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Megan, always the fearless one, pushed on, interviewing locals and piecing together the dark puzzle of our town's history. Her conversations revealed layers of secrets, each more disturbing than the last. And all the while, my guilt gnawed at me, the memory of the child I couldn't save haunting my every step. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of red, Megan turned to me. "Jason, we have to go deeper. These drownings aren't accidents. They're part of something much bigger." Her voice was firm, but I saw the flicker of fear in her eyes. She was right. We were in too deep, but there was no turning back now. We were on the brink of uncovering a truth that would change everything. The air was thick with tension, and the oppressive atmosphere of our beach town weighed heavily on us. Every clue Megan found brought us closer to the horrifying reality that the drownings were no coincidence. We continued our investigation, the oppressive atmosphere of our beach town pressing down on us. Every day, the sea seemed a little darker, and the waves were a little more menacing. Megan was relentless. Her determination was both inspiring and terrifying. We met with locals, each conversation peeling back another layer of our town's disturbing history. One night, as we were poring over old newspaper clippings in Megan's dimly lit living room, I heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind through the open window. I brushed it off as the wind playing tricks, but Megan looked up, her eyes wide. "Did you hear that?" she asked. We listened, but the whispering stopped. An uneasy silence settled over us. The next day, we walked along the beach, the salty breeze biting at our skin. The usual chatter of seagulls was oddly absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Megan seemed to sense it too, glancing over her shoulder more than once. At the old library, we dug into town records. The librarian, an old woman with piercing eyes, watched us closely. "You two should be careful," she said, her voice low and gravelly. "Some things are better left buried." Her warning hung in the air, adding to the growing sense of dread. That evening, as we walked back to Megan's place, the sky turned an ominous shade of gray. The air was thick and heavy, with the promise of a storm. The distant rumble of thunder echoed our unease. Suddenly, Megan stopped, her eyes fixed on something in the sand. It was a small, worn-out teddy bear, half buried. "Jason, look at this," she whispered. I picked it up, feeling a chill run down my spine. It was just a toy, but out here, it felt like a grim sign. Back at Megan's, we tried to piece together the clues. The more we uncovered, the more the pieces fit together into a horrifying picture. We found records of missing children, strange drownings, and whispered rumors of a secretive group. Each piece of information added to the weight of the secret we were uncovering. One night, as we sat surrounded by old documents, the lights flickered. The room grew cold, and a sense of foreboding settled over us. Megan looked at me, her face pale. "Jason, something is very wrong here." I nodded, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Sleep eluded us that night. Every creak of the house and every rustle of the wind seemed amplified. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Images of the drowned boy, the old librarian's warning, and the teddy bear haunted me. The feeling that we were teetering on the edge of something terrible was inescapable. The next morning, we decided to visit the old pier, a place that held many memories for us. As we walked along the weathered boards, the sound of the waves crashing below was almost deafening. Suddenly, Megan gasped. Carved into one of the wooden beams was a symbol, a crude, unsettling mark that neither of us recognized but somehow knew was significant. "This is it," Megan said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're close." The tension was palpable, and the sense of impending doom grew with each step we took. We were uncovering truths that had been hidden for too long, and the price of that knowledge was starting to feel very real. The beach town, once our home, now felt like a trap, each new discovery tightening its grip around us. The storm hit just as we made our way back from the pier. Rain lashed against us, and the wind howling in our ears. We ran, soaked to the bone, hearts pounding. Back at Megan's place, we dried off and sat in silence, the storm raging outside mirroring the turmoil within us. "Jason, we need to end this," Megan said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. I nodded, but inside, I was a mess. The guilt of my past failures weighed heavily on me. I couldn't let anything happen to Megan. I wouldn't survive that. We decided to confront the group that night. The storm provided cover, and the intensity of the situation pushed us forward. As we approached the old abandoned boathouse, the air felt charged with electricity. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, but Megan's determination kept us moving. Inside, the boathouse was dark and damp. The smell of rot and salt water was overpowering. We heard voices chanting low and rhythmic. Megan gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear and resolve. We crept closer, the flickering light of candles casting eerie shadows on the walls. The group was there, cloaked figures surrounding a small boy. My heart raced as I realized we were too late. They were going to sacrifice him. Megan's grip tightened, and I saw the fire in her eyes. We had to act. Stop. Megan's voice rang out, strong and defiant. The chanting stopped, and all eyes turned to us. The leader, a tall figure with piercing eyes, stepped forward. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice cold and menacing. The confrontation was intense. Megan and I fought with everything we had. The leader was strong, but desperation gave us an edge. As we struggled, I was thrown into the water. Panic set in as I relived my worst nightmare. But then I saw Megan fighting, determined to save the boy. I forced myself to focus, fighting through the water and pulling myself back to shore. Megan was still battling the leader, her movements fueled by pure willpower. I joined her, and together we managed to overpower him, freeing the boy. The group scattered, their dark ritual thwarted, but the leader's final words chilled me to the bone. "This isn't over." We took the boy to safety, with the storm still raging outside. As we sat in the small, safe haven of our childhood home, the boy clung to Megan, his eyes wide with fear. We had saved him, but at what cost? In the quiet aftermath, Megan and I sat together, exhausted and relieved. "We did it," she whispered, her head resting on my shoulder. But even as I held her, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Something didn't feel right. Days later, as we tried to move on, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd missed something. Then one evening I found an old journal hidden in the attic. It belonged to our father, who had been a lifeguard before me. As I read through it, my blood ran cold. He had been part of the group, believing the sacrifices were necessary to protect the town. The weight of his guilt had driven him to despair, and his final entry was a warning. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. The group had been around for generations, and our family had always been tied to it. My father's sacrifice had been my burden to bear, and now it seemed it was my turn to carry on the dark tradition. Megan noticed my silence and asked what was wrong. As I handed her the journal, her face paled. The realization that our family was entwined with this dark legacy was horrifying. The past we had tried to escape had finally caught up with us, and the nightmare was far from over.